Cris Derksen is a career artist, a career musician, as in she has made a career for herself as both an artist and musician. And maybe those don't need distinction, but Cris Derksen says she is just doing her job. And maybe that won't strike you as odd, but I have a lot of career artist friends who definitely don't refer to it as just doing their job. Not in the same sense as if they went to work every day as an ER nurse or construction worker doing their job. But that's definitely how Cris delivered it. Cris Derksen is a two-spirit, Juno-nominated artist from Treaty 8 territory in Northern Alberta. The credentials are too long for my typical intro. Known for a truly unique and blended style, she brings classical music and traditional Indigenous music together, making it with her signature electronic-fused cello playing and composition. She is an original artist with the groundbreaking Orchestral Powwow as part of her personal discography, as well as a sought-after composer and performer, from the chamber orchestras and symphonies across Canada to Carnegie Hall. All just part of the job. My name is Glen Erickson. This is Almost Famous Enough. Thank you for spending your time with us. This is Cris Derksen. Thank you, by the way. Jumping on, quick to go. Here we are, right? Which is pretty exciting. Cris, so it's been a while since you and I have talked. We have our own unique version of history together, which I'm sure we're going to cross paths on our conversation about. But yeah, I don't think I've seen you since the Love is a Battlefield shows that were touring around here. I think was 2021.
Yeah,
maybe. So you, in my history, I think of you as hailing from Edmonton, although your history is more obviously tied to Northern Alberta, right? And your Treaty 8 heritage. So, but do you get to come back here very often? Is your mom, Lisa, still in Edmonton?
Yeah, she's in Sherwood Park.
Okay. Yeah, diving into it, I'm really interested, Cris, in just digging into your own story, right? The whole arc of your journey as an artist, and an artist reflecting the person you are and who you've become. And I think the unique parts of your artistry and how those opportunities showed up would be, I think, really interesting and educational for other people who are looking at that. It's not the typical, even for me, the typical artists that I have most of my history with are, bands and people hitting the road and playing bars back and forth, and the version of musicianship. And you've sort of taken a blended approach in your career. And I think blended is maybe a bit of a theme for you, right? So, I mean, going all the way back, you just talked about, your mom having this really strong Mennonite background. If anybody listening doesn't know what that means, it's very homesteady.
It's like my grandparents were so strict, like the old colony Mennonite. It's so strict. It's kind of like the Amish. That's like the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without the colonization picture that I think a lot of people have from the American Amish teenagers going wild television shows that you see now, right? But still a very, very traditional community based, violating the code of the community was essentially like violating a law of God kind of thing. So there was that tightly considered, and lives and breathes out of southern Manitoba seems to be the heartbed of where all of this, and then they spread out across the country. But so what's interesting to me is so you have a mother who has come out of this very strong background, obviously Caucasian mother of, I'm sure, some maybe German descent is an easy assumption if it's Mennonite, as far as us Canadians always seem to have to reference which part of some continent outside of Canada we came from, since we all showed up here. And but then you have your father's side as well. And I'm curious because this is,
is going to play into the blend of who you are, which is
Literally.
amazing. And I'm sort of curious about, where did that start? Like, how did they meet? Did they get together? And my story, knowing you, was only as the child of a single parent, right? So I
Mhm.
never met your father. So I don't know how he plays into the story so much. So I'm wondering if you could give me a little bit of that background.
Yeah, so my dad is Cree. He comes from North Talk Cree Reserve. He comes from like a line of chiefs. So my grandfather's chief, my great great grandfather's chief. There was hereditary chiefs, and now they're voted in. So currently, my
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
dad is not chief, but my uncle Frank is chief. So it still seems to be like a bit of a family business. I didn't grow up on the res. I grew up mostly in Edmonton, and I would spend my summers and winters up visiting both sides of the family. And they're so
Okay.
dichotomous, like they're so opposite from each other. I grew up like with when I was 5, we're getting into some music things. When I was 5, my mom, she gave up her car funds to get me a piano because when I was 3, I told my mom I wanted to play the flute. And so my mom knew enough that she was like, no, she needs a piano. Piano is the basic. So she gave up her car fund to get me a piano. And at that time, she also gave up our TV. So I grew up without a TV. And it was like going to the res. I remember like so vividly like watching Harry and the Hendersons for the first time, and when the Sasquatchy guy like jumps in front of the car, I jumped so high because I like didn't have a TV. I didn't watch TV. I didn't know how to watch TV.
You weren't desensitized from jump scares in any way.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I
No,
was
even though it was a comedy, not a horror.
yeah. um, and then so like so from this kind of really contemporary like very modern kind of life with on the res, and then going to visit my grandparents on the other side, and in which I had to wear the dresses that they make with the puffy sleeves, and like there's absolutely no TV and like no radio really. Like it was they didn't have running water until I was like 7 up there.
Hmm.
It's really like kind of like living in the past. And so
Yeah.
going between the two communities was super dichotomous and super weird, and like also very different from my city life too.
Yeah.
So
So was that causing? I guess I'm curious what that was sort of creating in you as those years start. Probably you start approaching towards your adolescence, and then forming a lot more self identity. I'm curious what that sort of dichotomous upbringing was creating in you.
yeah, okay. I think we have to get a little bit deeper too, on my
Sure.
grandparents' side. So, and this plays. Oh, sorry about that. This plays into the music a lot. So I get questioned a lot, being like, "Where's your Mennonite side of your music?" And to be honest, the old colony Mennonites, they didn't have music. Like that was not part of what they did. So
Do
there
you mean
would
like
be
composition and music making, or you
yeah,
just?
like there's no radio, but there's also like
Mm,
in church, like the men on one side, women on the other, uh, they would like it would kind of be like these chanty things. But here's the thing: it was not written down. There's no notes on a page for them. It would just like whoever was the leader of the day would start on a tone, and everyone would find that tone, and then he'd like recite whatever poetry thing,
mm.
um, and the audience like follows him,
Like a
but like
call and response kind of
but
thing.
it was like, not even, like, they would, like, follow the
Mm.
notes, so when he would change notes, everyone would change notes so much later that it was just, like, chaos and very hard for my poor little brain to understand, and then on top of that, we have this, like, very uncomfortable you're, like, 2 by 4s, women on one side, men on the other, like, it's not an ideal situation for an 8-year-old, and then this terrible, terrible music, but also, here's the kicker: is that my grandmother was so, so, so racist against Indigenous people. So
Mm.
when I was born, and my mom phoned home to be like, "You're a grandparent." I'm the eldest cousin. Uh, my grandma didn't ask if I was a boy or a girl. They asked if I was red or white. Um, and my mom said red, and so then was immediately excommunicated. So there's like this racism that I grew up with against me is definitely does play into how I steer my music and how I steer. You know, I always do say I'm half Cree and half Mennonite, and I like to call myself a Creenanite. It's a cute little joke, and I always do. I'm like I am half and half, and I do need to represent half and half, but
Mm.
I'm not going to bring up a lot of these intense stories to a regular audience because that's a lot. That's a lot for regular people to understand. So a lot of my perception and a lot of my music making comes from the Indigenous perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Well, I'm not afraid of the intense stories or however they play into making you who you are in that. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of interest to me in how somebody gets formed out of both sides, and interesting to hear you speak sort of with a respect and a reverence of wanting to include both parts of that heritage into
Mhm.
who you are right now. I mean, tracking that this is also the end of the 80s, like 80s into the into the 90s.
Yeah.
We loosely use this term. That was a different time back then. It probably gets used too much in a passive way that shouldn't be used to to get out of uncomfortable conversations. But it was so drastically different, right? In that I have to remind myself when I feel shocked that someone was still using colors to talk about race,
Mhm.
um, that I
Yeah.
had to remind myself how common that still was, only that not that long ago in our human history in this part of the world, right? So, yeah, I find that a little bit shocking, but at the same time, I have to remind myself what it was like. So, I guess the part I'm really interested in still is how was that sort of shaping this like young person in Edmonton, and where you're a child. Okay, let me just put it this way: have a single parent household, all those disadvantages that you're already having to deal with just in that sort of domestic situation, right? And then what most people might not see is how much you're wrestling with two very opposite senses of heritage and family and upbringing. And while I can't understand it, I can only imagine, there's a lot of, I don't know what the right word is. You can correct it for me. Pressure or whatever it might be about making sure how well you're connected, right, to your Indigenous roots. Um, because society around you is probably like trying to usher you into being more white than Indigenous. I mean, that was, I think, very prevalent still in the 80s. I don't, if there's any truth to that, or if it was a different story, I'm curious what that was like for you.
I mean, I always it was always just a part of it. It was always just it didn't really feel like a struggle. It was just like what it was. Like, yes, I have a bad dad, but I have amazing aunties and like I have amazing family. So it wasn't like, yeah, it didn't really feel like that to me. If Because I was always
Mm.
like, I always knew who I was, I guess. So, sometimes ignorance is bliss. Like, I
Yeah,
just,
I mean, that's a great statement, Chris. Like, I met you in your teens,
yeah.
and I guess right off the bat, I'll echo that I always felt like you had a really strong sense of who you were. That was apparent in your teens, and that's not a gift very many adolescents receive or have. And most of the ones I was meeting and working with, like, did not have that sense. It was, if I can be completely honest, it was even probably a little intimidating, right? For an adult to meet a young person who had a strong sense of identity.
Mhm.
And I was not in a place at that time where I was prepared to deal with it, clearly. I mean, this is sort of a new podcast for me. I don't expect everybody to know my story. I'm not ashamed of it. The story's not about me; it's about you. But the background is, I worked at a church and I worked with teens, and it was a very upper middle class church on the west side of Edmonton in Northern Alberta that was built on a lot of affluence. And I was given a lot of freedom and opportunity. And we've only briefly ever talked about this, but for me, like an Indigenous young person in a single home was not the average kid in that group, right? And I was only in my mid to late 20s. And despite how cocksure and ridiculously arrogant I was, I literally did not know what I was doing. And so that for me was, I was so blind to so many things, right? So hearing you talk about that and say, like, I knew who I was, it immediately connects to me, because that was my sense of you at that time.
Yeah. And I think that's also like what's given me this career, is that I've always known who I am, and I've always like had I feel like I have a strong moral compass, but I know the stories that I want to tell, and I think they're important and folks want to listen to them, and that's really cool.
When did the transition for you, if you were very, very young, because you had an interest, you get a piano in your house, you're learning music theory, you don't have a TV, so maybe you're not getting inundated with pop culture. So how does the transition to, this instrument that's carried you around the world, the cello, when does that happen for you?
Yeah, that was in grade 4. Edmonton had a public school string program. So it was completely accessible. It was completely affordable for my single parent mother to put me into cello. The story is I came home with a piece of paper saying, does your son or daughter want to play violin, viola, cello, or bass? I wanted to play the bass. I thought the cool kids played the bass, but my mom's car was too small. She drove a little high-end pony. And so this is how we got stuck with the cello. And I'm so fortunate because the cello just has such a giant range and can be so many different things. And, it's really relatable. It's the same range as the human voice. I've only met one person. This is recently in Japan. And he was like, I hate the cello, but I like the way you play it. And I was like, who hates the cello? I've
never heard that.
Heard anybody hate the cello.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah.
So it was pretty early on that became your instrument, right? Okay.
Yeah, totally. And like in junior high and like when I knew you, like I'd be playing along to Nirvana and like, what was that the like Christian rock groups. I just like play along to albums.
Yeah.
And that was like the beginning of me. That was like, baby me, like exploring what I wanted to do. I was like
ear training, right? Like your own
totally.
version of ear training.
Yeah.
Which is really adjacent to like most guitar players who end up in bands. It's
totally
same experience, right?
Yeah, totally. And I knew that I knew a lot of things. Like I knew in grade 11, I went to a performing arts school in Edmonton, Vic, and I was like in a class of like 1,000 wannabe actors, and I was the only cellist. And I was like, oh, if I want to be in the arts, this is the way I want to go. To get into university, I had to take a year off because I wasn't good enough yet because it was group lessons, right? So I didn't get private lessons until grade 12, halfway through the school year. So I took a year off and did 2 lessons a week and then got into university. And again, knowing who I was, I didn't want to be like a desk musician, like an orchestra musician. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to play the folk fests. That was like my main goal. But I was like, I would need to play the cello good enough to play my own music so I can go play the folk fest circuit, because that was, my goal at the time. So I come to the cello from like kind of a sideways positioning of like not like I love classical music. I work in it now. And it's always been a part of me, but it's also like the classism of classical music was something I had a hard time with. Same with our church. Like the classism of our church was crazy. So I think, as much as like my, I guess like ancestry develops me, so did so did poverty. And so did like my perception of like how folks should be treated.
Well, I have some questions there. I mean, there's 2 things I'm going to try to make sure I can remember to get to them about your path related to what you just said. So first of all, I mean, you have this opportunity of going to the only performing arts school at the time and for a long time in Edmonton, right? So there was only one opportunity for any student to have that, which is in a sense an advantage, even though you're right, it was massively populated by like theater kids, not as much music. And that's the reason a lot of young people were going there or asking to go there, even if they weren't in the area, or that, you know, but so you sort of have that advantage, I think was what you're identifying. But was there also the disadvantage, which maybe you're sort of suggesting in between the lines of probably couldn't afford to go get private lessons, that maybe a lot of other like developing cellists or traditional, you know, orchestral instruments have, you know, get on that track pretty early, right? For private lessons.
Totally. It's so early. Like, I only taught for 1 year, but the youngest kid was like, I think 4. And
Mm.
like the mother was like, do you think this kid has a chance? And I'm like, they are 4. Sure. They can do whatever they want. They have so,
Yeah.
like what? So yeah, the world is quite, the classical world is quite strict, similar to
Yeah.
religion. Um,
Yeah. So, I mean, you're probably feeling a little late in some way. So that was one, I think, point of interest, because what are the, I mean, even someone, a parent asking that question,
mm.
I'm interested to know, like, what are, when someone's training like that, what are the opportunities that are ahead of them? Like, if somebody has been in some version of an instrument, classically trained, either from time they're 4 or 6 or 8, like, what's the trajectory of possibility for them? Or maybe you can say, what was it then versus what it is now?
I think that's up to the human. I think that's up to the human who's like behind the instrument and like where they want to take it, because like there's a bunch of trumpet players that are amazing jazz trumpeters. There's so many different things you can do within music, within that one thing. So like I had to go to classical music school because that's how I got that's how you could get the training. There's not really jazz cello schools. I mean, there are jazz cellists, but there's not really jazz cello schools.
Hmm.
And there's no like rock and roll school for cello, which I probably would have taken, but I probably wouldn't have been as good. So I think like the normal trajectory is that and the other thing they don't teach you in music school is business, and they don't teach you like about now we hear about branding and being your own brand and blah blah blah, but like they
Yeah.
don't teach you that. You just like I've my hat's been my brand for the last 20 years, and like I took those extra business courses, I learned how to write grants, I knew that I wanted to where I wanted to go, and I knew that that path wasn't the regular path.
When did you
um
figure that out? When did you figure out like you needed to take courses or figure out the business part? Like, how old, where was that in the,
Um, I did a couple years at U of A, but I was not very I was a terrible student. I was like more of a bar star. I didn't relate to my classmates. Most of them still lived at home. I was on my own by that point, and like their parents would like make their lunches and pick them up after orchestra, and I was like, "What the heck? I've been living on my own for like 2 years." So it just wasn't the right space for me. It wasn't the right place for me. I wasn't in the right place. So I took a year off and I did Canada World Youth, which brought me to Brazil and then to Vancouver again. And I had been spending some summers in Vancouver. And it was like after Canada World Youth, I was like, no, I really want to be a cellist and I really want to play the folk fest. And then I got into UBC and then I cared. But I had to like kind of go through my own. Yeah, my own mistakes to get to the place of like wanting it really bad.
yeah.
Um and like yeah, I wanted it real bad. Like that was the only thing I wanted. And I couldn't for the life of me get a damn job, like a regular job. So I busked for like 6 months in Vancouver. Which is like so hard. Like so it's hard on the soul. But then I did get back into university. I got into UBC, and that's when I was like, I want to play the folk fest. This is why I'm here. I'm going to get really, really good. So I worked my ass off and got really, really good.
So busking paid the bills? Like, how hard did you have to, like, how long did you have to sit out there? And
I
Yeah,
mean,
part of
yeah.
me wonders, like, is there a lot of competition? Were you in front of the art museum? Is it on Granville? Like, where was the best spot to earn the best
Yeah.
the, the best money
The
busking in
most
Vancouver?
money I made, I think, was Canada Day morning. I went to English Bay, um, and
Mm,
like all the old people, and I just like played Bach and played some Dirks and things, and like the the birds would all come swim around and watch, and I think I made like $500 that day, which was
yeah,
pretty
that's
good.
pretty good. That's a pretty
That's a
good
pretty good
day
day.
for
And I was like,
busking.
also like that was like 20, what, 22, 23,
Yeah,
23
that's
years
when
ago.
you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like in my 20s, and like I lived in a big punk house, and my rent was super affordable, and yeah, is it was good
Well,
times.
all of that is super punk. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, and that's
Yeah,
the age.
yeah.
Obviously, that's the age for it, which I think is fantastic and hilarious at the same time. So you're obviously starting to progress through what your options might be, and I was curious where that stage, and you just identified, was where you sort of really decided to pursue it, whether that was happening in high school, like when I knew you, but I didn't know all of that about your life, or whether that sort of happened a little bit later, which I think it does for a lot of people to get to that point where it's like, really, when you say, like, I want it bad enough, I think it's important. You hear that a lot, right? About musicians. Like, you can watch every season of American Idol and they all seem to want it like nothing else. But we all know from experience, once you get into it, like,
Mhm.
are you willing to busk for 6 months and do whatever you have to do? Are you willing to sacrifice every other thing
Yeah,
possible for this? Just what it takes, right?
yeah, and like yeah, the to be a touring musician and like to be gone from your family like so much is wild. Like,
Yeah.
I'd like hang out. I was so lucky though. Like, so in university, a friend I had already played the Vancouver Folk Fest, and this friend who hired me for that was like, "Hey, Chris, who do you want to play with next?" And I was like, "Tanya Tagaq," and she's an Inuit. That's
Mm,
her.
yeah.
And my friend made it happen. My friend made brought Tanya to Vancouver. We did like a gig with a bunch of different folks, and me and Tanya caught on like House on Fire, and then I started touring with her. So like before, when I did my grad recital, the next day I came to Toronto to record, no, to Ottawa to record at the NAC, and then we went to Spain like the next day.
And
I
was
was,
that like her, like supporting her music, like playing on her,
yeah,
like, if you're okay.
yeah, and like I don't know if folks know Tanya's music at all, but Tanya is 1,000% only she only improvises. I think I've had like maybe like 2 rehearsals with her ever in life.
Yeah, I bet.
Um, so it's like just complete improvisation and complete like balls to the wall. You're thrown in. I learned how to listen really good. I learned a lot from Tanya. I learned how to not tour. I learned how to, I learned how to pay people properly. Because I was
Mm,
just a side musician, and it's a struggle, man, to
yeah.
getting like 350 a gig, and like $50 per diem or something, and but you're in Europe, right? Like, so you're like kind of spending as much as you're making at that point.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. You can probably shed a little more light on this too. Because I think a question a lot of people will often have about music when they hear people telling their story is, I don't know if you've sat through, like keynotes, or they bring musicians up and they get interviewed. And my brain is going always between the lines of like, okay, so that's an awesome story, but how do you get that? Right. So you just say, like, you got a chance to meet Tanya, who you really wanted to. And side note, I find that super impressive, because balls to the wall is a great way to describe her, because she's fierce. Like, I've always used the word fierce,
Yeah.
and it would be intimidating, even more so now, realizing how much would be improvised. That to be that fierce in improvisation is,
Hmm.
it's just another level. So tagging around
Hmm.
with that would be very intimidating. Your self-confidence, obviously, that we talked about earlier, has to have played through in your 20s, being able to pull that off. But let me back that up even a little more, because you said while you're at UBC studying, you get a chance to play at the Vancouver Folk Fest. So how do you get that gig
Mm.
at that age in still a very much development phase? How do you get that gig?
I'm a big believer in like putting things out there and like being like, I want more of this. Like I don't do a 5-year plan. I find that too esoteric. But I am definitely like I want to do more of that. So like currently my things are like I want to write more symphonies. So like just putting that out in the into the world and into your mind, and it's like kind of amazing how that happens. How
Mm.
for me like that's really worked for me is like knowing that I've always wanted to do that, getting my name out there. I also, when I was graduating from university, Cirque du Soleil came knocking at my door, being like, "Hey, do you want to go to China to work on this cello project?" And I was like, "That sounds nice, Cirque du Soleil, but no, I need to make my name here in Canada. I need to make my name at home first." So I worked on making my name. You play the
And you said no.
I said no to Cirque du Soleil, yeah, so I could run around with Tanya.
That's pretty ballsy, Cris. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, but
So
yeah.
so while you're with UBC, you end up in a chair position with the symphony in Vancouver.
Mhm.
So where did that sort of happen and land? Because that's a pretty significant thing for your age,
Yeah,
I think, as well, right?
yeah. Like I said, I worked my ass off. I got real good. I wish I was that good still. But to get it, it was just they have subs, so profs will bring kids in and bring folks in that are capable of doing the work. Do you know what's interesting about symphonies now is that like you learn those symphonies in university. So when you are subbing in or like symphony players in Vancouver, they've been playing the same music since
Mhm.
university, like in
Yeah,
generally, like Beethoven's Ninth, like we all played it in first year.
yeah,
And so,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So I guess, yeah. So part of my interest then, because what you're like, you said, like lately you've been in the classical world. It's
Mhm.
employing you. It's paying a lot of bills. But and I want to sort of pull that apart a little bit as we go. But um, maybe this is a part of, and we're already sort of digging into the question I asked earlier about sort of how you get into like what are the options for people who are classically trained, because there's a certain set of options that I think to the outside eye have always existed. Like, are you just going to try to get on as an occasional player with like your local symphony, or eventually work your way up to a chair, and sort of those paths versus then we form maybe a little quartet and we become the best at playing weddings and events around the city. Or I don't know what the careers are, but it feels like they're a lot smaller in the area of composition, right?
Mm. Yeah, I
So
mean, it's composition's a pretty competitive field. I think like what's the problem is no there's not the same kind of funding for composition as there is for like it's up to the orchestra. And so like everyone's short on dollar bills and the commissions are the first thing to go. And so it's like a super competitive field. It's also like pretty niche. There's not, you know,
well,
there's
there's
not a
two things here, right? Like there's compositions of like commissioned, I
Mhm.
think, and like how big a part is that in the world of symphonies around the different cities, or just the classical community that's obviously so distinct from the pop or even indie music world, right? So how big a part does that play? Because you've like, if I read your bio list and your Wikipedia, right, like it's littered with things that you were either commissioned to play, or a lot of composition, a lot of writing,
Mm.
and full transparency. Like, I'm gonna try to let you name them. I'd be so embarrassed to butcher some of the words and the names here, but
Yeah.
so yeah, tell me a little bit about that world of either commissions and compositions in the classical world.
They are, like I said, like symphony ones are just so hard to get. I call them my unicorn gigs because
Mm,
there's just not a lot of opportunity for them. There's just not a lot of money for it. So every time I get one, it's like I'm doing real good.
Was Love is a Battlefield one of those?
Yep, Love is a Battlefield. There's a piece called Parkdale that's just 3 minutes that TSO commissioned. Rebellion, the Thunder Bay Symphony. That was like a collab between Thunder Bay Symphony and DCMF, which is it's a high school in Thunder Bay that brings in Indigenous kids that come from remote communities that don't have high schools. So it's like the fly-in school. So it's like pretty rough and tumble school. And they brought me in for 4 days, and I hung out with some very angsty teenagers and their guitars, and we wrote a little symphony piece called Rebellion. It's so cute. It is like, it's so angsty. Like, it is so 16-year-old.
So that Nirvana ear training came in handy for you.
Totally. And then the big one, which is Controlled Burn, commissioned by Yannick Zitz. And then I have a new one, TSO, for 2026. I start writing it in 25.
Okay, so that's part of a question I wanted to ask there. Without you, I'm not asking you to divulge numbers, but I think a lot of people would be curious. So if you land one of these unicorn pieces, how big a chunk is that taking out of your life to do it? And how long does it usually span? And how, I guess an easier way to put it is like, how big a part of what your, for lack of a better term, annual income or what you pull together, where does that sit? Is that a big piece? Is it not as big as people would think?
It's pretty easy. This Canadian League of Composers has a recommended thing. Yeah, they have like a recommended number, so it's like about $1,000 a minute that you get paid for symphony gigs, and then it like goes down. So like chamber music is less. It goes at like how many parts do you have to write is kind of how you get paid. So, and pieces, they come, for me, the actual writing is faster than the concept. I think I like spend a lot of time being like, what am I going to say? What is my concept? What am I trying to say? What's the story here? I'm not just sitting down and, making things pretty.
Which speaks to artistry, right? Like,
like, and I need the story to know where I'm going to go with the piece too. So that part takes a long time, but then like the actual sitting down with it, it's like, that can be like 2 weeks or something, 3 weeks. If I work at it like every day. And I kind of like, for that kind of work, I do like concentrated time on it. So like where it's like, this month is only this, which is like rare in my world. Cause I do film and documentary. I do a lot of documentaries. And then like podcasts and like random things come up. So I'm often working on more than one thing at once, which can get confusing for my brain, I guess. To be like, where's my focus? I prefer to like work on something like for a month or 3 weeks and then move on.
Okay. Let me, I'm going to jump back because I like going back and staying on a timeline. So would I pull a couple of things together? So you're finishing up at UBC, you're actually getting your degree. You've spent a few years in this, I'm all in, this is the most important thing phase, but you want to be a rock star. You're putting it out there in the universe. You're getting opportunities like touring with Tanya Tagaq. And you're developing your own thing. And this is really what you're known for, right? And what I also just personally think is absolutely incredible is your own artistic expression that developed, which was this blend of being a cellist, classically trained, now obviously growing up, you're training yourself to Nirvana and others, and the desire to sort of compose your own version, blending electronic instruments, looping a cello, which the first time I heard you do that, I was so blown away. And I think a lot of people now should continue to go and check out all your works and be blown away because they just don't see it anywhere else in any practice. So when did that start developing? Like when did this version of your own artistic expression start to develop?
Yeah, I had a roommate, Bronwyn, in university at UBC, and she had a loop station, and I borrowed it and never gave it back. And it like I took to it like it was so fast, it's so easy. I could like write my own like symphonies by myself. I fully understood it, and again, like wanting to take the cello and myself out of this like high class stuffy rule based world to I wanted to bring the cello to street level to
Mm.
make it relatable. So yeah, it was like 20 years 22 years ago, I think, when I first got my first or when I stole my first loop
When you
station.
stole your first loop station?
Yeah, and then the other pedals came pretty quick after it. Like I by the time I did that gig with Tanya, I had already moved loop and multi-effect pad with the cello. And that's still like my basic setup is like the loop, the multi-effect
Yeah.
pad, and then like a drum machine or something, some percussion.
I would imagine some people would maybe ask, or you've been asked the question of whether, like, just the desire to use that sort of technical equipment to sort of just expand what you could create was the complete sort of modus operandi, or was there any influence of electronic music, which uses these tools, obviously? Was there any of that coming in, or were the tools just a part of an ends to a means, or a means to an end, I should say,
Yeah, I
spelling create?
mean, there's a few folks like Joran, she's Quebec cellist. She was using some stuff on the cello that I really liked, and then Apocalyptica is like they're like a heavy metal cello band that were influential, and then but it was like me just finding the things and then finding people afterwards. So like I was already looping, and then I heard about Owen Pellet and
Hmm.
or Final
Mhm.
Fantasy at the time, and
Final
like
Fantasy, yeah.
yeah, so it was like I was already doing it, and then I was seeking out other folks that were also doing it, I guess. But
Yeah.
I now famously do not listen to music anymore because it's like my 9 to 5 is
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty
yeah.
common, right? So, well, let me just, before I jump back to something else, just sidebar that comment. I think that's an interesting comment that people would be curious about, where your inspirations now
Mhm.
come from. I think it's very common, all of us, regardless of which discipline in music, our teens to our 20s, we're trying to recreate everything that meant
Mhm.
something so deeply and passionately to us, right? And we want nothing more than two things: to recreate one of those things and make somebody else feel it the way we felt it, right? And we want to be kind of part of the fabric of
Mhm.
what those people that were big stars to us were. Well, now,
Mhm.
yeah. So now you're Cris Derksen at, 20 years later, who's part of the fabric. So what's inspiring you, influencing, if you're not listening to music the same way, which is completely normal?
Yeah, I mean, I always look at it as like I'm a jeweler. Like, so I take little bits and pieces of things I like. Like, it's impossible not to listen to music. It's impossible to close our ears. So,
Mm.
you know, my wife listens to lots of music, and I therefore listen to whatever she is listening to. And I just try to not get overly influenced, but I'll take little bits and pieces of sounds that I like and blend it together to make my own bracelet. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I often am like it's like braiding for me, like braiding the past and the present and the future together, braiding things that I like into
Mm.
the work that I'm doing, bringing in my Indigenous heritage along with like the classical training, but adding a little bit of hip hop beats because I like the 808. Yeah.
Well, I talked about this to someone recently as well, because I'm somebody who, in even at my age, I only really listen to new music still. I never
Mm.
go back and dig up old things. I have my classic rock, like everybody, of what I will keep playing that meant something to me for 30 years. But I have a friend who, like, is a musician who said essentially the same thing, right? Like, I don't really listen to anything. So of course I'm curious and I ask, and they similarly, but the way they sort of described it was like, all those soundtracks are playing in my head. It's just math. I've got 20 years of soundtracks. I don't need to, either I don't have room for more, or I've got so many things to pull from, the way you
Yeah.
describe braiding or making a bracelet.
Mhm.
Very similarly. So that expression for you does follow a typical rock star path in a sense, and not a traditional classically trained one, in that you compose and you release albums. Like, you release
Mm.
3 albums of your music between 2010 and 2015, right? So what was happening during that phase? Was your mind, looking back on it now, do you feel like there was sort of a very narrow, like, blinders of what you wanted to come out of that in releasing original music in CDs like that, and developing a very great performance, I think, at the time, right? Which was, I'm sure you were experiencing people's, I don't want to say shock or awe, but a lot of people hadn't seen what you were doing, period.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you had to have been feeling that even in the moment on the stage, or when you talk to people after. So what's happening in that phase of making CDs, like a rock star or a regular
Yeah.
aspiring Canadian artist, right?
Canadian indie artist.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I think the goal back then, like I said before, the goal only was just folk fest. I just wanted to like party. Like, I want to party all summer long, um, and I want to get paid to do it. I love the folk fest because they also have that improvisation moment with this shared stages of when all these different artists are just thrown on the same stage, and
Mm-hmm.
you never know what's going to happen. I love those moments. Those are like, I live for those moments. Those like moments of connecting with somebody that you don't know at all, or maybe don't even speak the same language with, and like creating something together. I think that's so beautiful and so magical, and like, and such a gift to be able to do it. I think like, yeah, the first 2 albums were very similar, and it's great. Like, and I was definitely like defining my own sound, I think is how they say it.
Yeah,
um,
for sure. It's very obvious. Yeah.
yeah, and those 2 albums still get licensed so much. Like, I can't
Mm.
even tell you how many requests we get to license the first 2, or the first album. Like, it's wild, and it's amazing that it's lived that long too. Like,
Which
20.
kind of licensing do you mean? Are it like various, or are you talking to,
Like
like,
TV
to be
shows.
used in productions and TV and
Yeah,
music things? Yeah, okay.
yeah,
That's
TV
great. So
shows.
it's kind of sync stuff that's going
Yeah,
on.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then Orchestral Powwow is a different step. You were trying something very intentional with that.
Yeah.
How did that develop for you?
Well, that came out of like sitting on so many different art juries, and
Mm.
realizing there's so much classical music that was quasi Indigenous, but they didn't have an Indigenous lead in it. They didn't have an Indigenous composer. The story was Indigenous, but like there's like this one Going Home Star, the it's a ballet, and the choreographer wasn't Indigenous, and like it turns out that the storyteller Joseph Boyden was also not Indigenous. So like, I was sitting, and there's like all these huge projects going through, and like getting white men to compose it, and I'm like, no man, like we can do that. I can do that. Let me do that. And so that's how Orchestral Powwow came to be. And I was like friends with the Hallucination Tribe Called Red Boys.
Mm.
So um, I met I'm using the same for that project. I was using the same library as the Tribe Called Red. And instead of cutting it all up as they do, I kept those powwow pieces intact, and then wrote symphonic music around it. And it was always like meant to be, it was just meant to be like a concept project. But we do tour it now. It's crazy. It does get toured.
Yeah.
Um, but it's, yeah, for me, that it was just about like, no, it's like lay off, hands off Indigenous stories. Like, let the Indigenous people tell their own stories.
Which was
So,
very timely, I think, in Canada. Don't you
mhm.
think? Like
Yeah,
2015 and then 2016, if you start touring it, you gave it legs, right? It got a
yeah,
lot more life than just a normal album release cycle, quote unquote, as a
yeah.
result. But I mean, it's not long after that that you have Gordon Downey trying to, like,
Mhm.
publicly shed some more light on
Mhm.
even what you talked about before, like the water situation that was still
Mhm.
happening on reserves around Canada, the
Yeah.
ridiculousness of the way the government had ignored promises. So I felt like a lot of that was blowing up in Canada. Were you
Mhm.
feeling like you were getting pulled up into that based on what you were trying to do?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely like, I've known Jeremy Dutcher since before Jeremy Dutcher was Jeremy Dutcher.
Mm.
There's
Before
like a
Polaris. Okay,
yeah.
you've dropped two Polaris winners now already in the interview, so that's pretty
Yeah.
great.
Like the Indigenous community is small, right? Like we
Mm.
kind of know everybody that's in the arts, and so I think all of us got busier, and then with the release of the Orchestral Powwow, that led me back to classical music. So
Mm.
it was like that thing that proved that I could compose nice things that led me back into getting commissions.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, so I'm glad you said that. My outside again observation, right, is that you
Mhm.
had this timeline of you were creating your own sound, and you took a pretty standard Canadian indie artist route for somebody who wanted to be a rock star of recording
Yeah.
albums and releasing them, and in a sense trying some version of a touring cycle and performance cycle and
Mhm.
album cycles, and then that's the last album release technically like that you've had, right? So
Yeah.
but in that time when you're making those aspirations, coming at it from a different way than the typical Canadian indie
Mhm.
artist, who's I were you talking to people or thinking in your mind, I need to get a manager and then I need to get a booking agent like the typical way, and land a publicist? And is there a label that puts this out and I have to secure all these? And then do I need a lawyer? Are you going through those same typical Canadian indie artist growth
Yeah, a
spurts?
little, yeah, a little bit, but not really. See, I was just working with one manager for I think we worked together for like 12 years, and she got Parkinson's and had to retire. So I've been always just kind of like insular in that way. I don't f with labels because I own all of my music 100% on both sides, and I really value that. I am the producer of the album. It is my baby. It is nobody else's baby. I want all of the pie. So I've always stepped away from label conversations. I have two people now. This is kind of funny. Like I've got one person, Kim, from High Priestess, publishing, and so she does
Mm, yep.
all my TV and licensing things. So this year I've done one feature film score, a Nat Geo documentary, and I'm about to start another documentary. So she takes all of those contracts, like all of the TV film contracts, as well as all of the sync stuff. And then I've got Nikki from AIM agency as my person, like my performer agent. And then she's also doing the commissions, which I'm basically telling her what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she's
Yeah.
handling all your performance bookings and
Yeah.
touring and doing arrangements and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, and so at this point you sort of have a bit of a team and you've figured out what
Yeah.
ones you need along the way. Obviously, I think that's a big part of it. I think it's interesting you mentioned early on, nobody teaches the business side of it. Like it's not until 2013, 14 I'm in a role with Alberta Music. The provincial industry associations in Canada are
Yeah.
figuring out that they need to step in and fill this gap of development of artists because there is none of that kind of stuff. So we're
Yeah.
building programs that do that kind of thing. But you, in your great self-confidence and self-awareness all along, have probably just decided to take those reins and figure them out
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. And like it's all relationships, right? It's all about making friends. And like I
This
don't it's
business
not
for sure.
it is not networking, it is making friends. You actually have to make friends. And it's about that like building those relationships that are like, you know, and
Yeah.
keeping them and like don't not burning any bridges. like, you know?
Well, that's a lot of good self-awareness. I feel like I'll be really honest with you. So the reason I'm doing a podcast is because I'm sitting on 20 plus years of touching every part of the music business.
Mm.
And I've had people say, well, you should write a book maybe. Or I'm like, I don't read books. So why would I do that? Or write a blog, and nobody reads blogs. But I would love to. So that's why I'm here, right? I'm like, I would rather talk to people about their experience, not mine. But, you know, I want to pull those stories that I think make sense, that people love to sit and hear. When I go to conferences, I want to hear someone talk or interview an artist, and I want to try to pull everything out between the lines that I didn't hear in their bio or some place that gets fed around. I want to know how it happened for them, and who they are and how that shaped, because then I want to try to translate it for myself. So that development part, you had to become, you know, the business manager of your business and figure out how to kind of do these things. What were, to you personally, what were the hardest aspects of the music business to figure out, like to learn?
I think like the actual like not over touring and not over hanging out with your bandmates is so important. And I think like, and it's like about how do we have these like beautiful relationships with those that we play music with without it getting too personal and too intense and too volatile. um I think, you know, like especially when you're starting and you're just going so hard, you're just like saying yes to like absolutely everything that comes your way, and like that can be dangerous. Yeah, like I hung out with Tanya too much, man. Like she's like my sister. Like no,
Yeah.
I needed, you know, I think for me, like it was like those lessons were the harder ones to figure out, is like the how to tour properly, how to like, maybe I can only do 3 weeks on the road without losing my mind. So maybe I can't do 6 weeks on the road. Like, let's go home, you know?
Yeah.
And so like, and trying to keep that practice, you know, going. I mean, after the pandemic, my things definitely shifted for me. So I'm doing so much more composition, which is great. So I'm not having to like fight anyone to stay home for or go
Yeah.
home after 3 weeks. But I think that's really important. I think that we forget that we do have to go home. Like,
Well, that's a great point. I mean, that's a great example of self-awareness as well, that I think most people learn the hard way over a much longer span of time in this business, of feeling like I can't say no to any opportunities, right? Or you don't know or believe the next one might be around the corner.
yeah.
And so people will burn themselves out. People burn themselves out on the industry side and getting jaded.
Mm.
And I don't know how you personally feel. You don't, and you've never come across as jaded, despite how much you've had to learn and be a part of the business. Like even reading a little bit about you, Cris, and the amount of opportunities you've stepped into for leadership things, where you've sat on boards or you've been the advisory person to a Philharmonic, right, in Calgary, or the things you've created with the Banff Art Center. Like those leadership things mean that you're now having to mingle with people who look like me probably most of the time, right? And people of privilege who don't understand at all where you've come from, where the boardroom, although I don't feel comfortable in boardrooms, but feel more
Mhm.
comfortable them to maybe what you do, you know, because if the golden rule, you know, if the first chapter of the book, if I ever wrote it in the music business, is don't be a dick,
Yeah.
which
Exactly.
you've sort of already hinted at, that you've figured out, and you know
Yeah.
that rule, and it's part of your success. I guess I'm curious, because you've done a lot of things and stepped into a lot of roles like that with everything you've learned. What's that part of the experience been like for you? Were you treated like, you know, you get 15 years past high school, 20 years past high school, and you start doing these things? I guess I have to ask, were you made to feel like the other again
Um,
in those situations ever, or was that not
not really,
not
not
a big
really.
deal?
One thing about the tokenism like thing, that my perception of it is that it has only allowed me to have a wider audience. So like people will be like, "Oh, but you don't fit in the box," and I'm like, "No, but I fit in every box." Like so, it allows me to like perform in so many more areas than even you are. invited to perform in. I think
Mm-hmm.
me being in all of these different boxes allows my career to be so varied and so wide, and so it's always been like a positive for me. I think like, yeah, for sure I get awkward in boardrooms and like at schmoozy things, and like I also to be honest, I don't really feel like I'm like necessarily like a part of the industry, quote unquote. I know that I work in the industry, but I'm like, I'm doing my own, I'm on my own path, man. I got my own stuff. I'm like, you know,
Almost every
chronically,
artist I know feels that way. Interestingly, I think
yeah.
they always feel like they're. I mean, and to some people, maybe it's because they express more desire to get a seat at the table than others.
Mm.
But you know,
Yeah, and I feel like, you know what? If I'm the one getting the seat at the table because I'm Indigenous right now, then great. Then
mm,
hallelujah, you know, like let's open up those doors. Let's keep those doors open. Let's like for the for the classical world, I'm like, all right, like how do we make orchestras look and sound more like Canada? How do we make this open? How do we make this a warm and accepting place? Because it's
mm,
kind of not.
yeah.
um, yeah,
Mm. That's
yeah.
really interesting. I think, yeah, just being able to express that confidently has to be, I don't know if you look at it this way, but part of the secret of your success. I think there's just so many opportunities along the way to take the glass half empty version of those things.
Mm,
And I guess I partly bring that up, or maybe it's a question underneath this because um, I I mean, I've talked to people. I'm in a position now where I've done hiring.
mhm.
There's, this version that is a very generic version of diversity and inclusion in corporate, in workplace, in the music industry,
Mm,
in how grants are handed out, so it's part of that. And there's a generic version which sometimes feels off, but I feel unqualified to say that because I'm a person of
mhm.
privilege. But it feels like that versus what you hope would be a more authentic version of that. And, full transparency, like I need to hear what your side of that looks like to understand because I wouldn't understand otherwise.
Yeah, like for me, I'm like, I think it's amazing that Canada Council has its own Indigenous fund that I go to. You know, I think that's so great, and I hope they never take it away. And like for me, it's like we all have an important story to tell. We all have important stories to tell, and I feel like I feel privileged to be able to tell those stories. Like
Mm.
I don't know how you get half the gigs I get. And like some of them are like mind-blowingly difficult and some of them are just gorgeous, and like yeah, it's like kind of
But it
like
starts with talent, right? Like it starts and ends with like you don't get that foot in the door just because you check a box, right?
you have to be
Like they
good.
have to believe you're not going to shit the bed
Yeah, you have to be good
first
and you
and
have to like
foremost,
yeah, you have to give a good track record. You have to get your things in on time. You
and
know, you
don't
have
be
to
a dick along the way. Yeah.
don't be a dick. Do your job. Yeah, you know, make people feel that they are also loved and welcome. Like, I
Were there
think
any gigs or any of these along the way where you were like, oh, I think I just shit the bed there and I'm never going to get a call again? Did you have any of those happen along the
I
way?
mean, for sure. I recently, like, I brought up Nat Geo, and so I just scored a 90-minute documentary for National Geographic, and holy cow, it was so hard. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, like because Nat Geo has this beautiful library of music, symphonic music that the director is allowed to use whenever they want. I don't know why, but he was like, "No, I want Cris Derksen." And the music that I was like the temp music that I was listening to try and compose against, I was like, oh my god, this is brilliant. What do you want me to do? Like I don't know what to do here. He was
Mm.
very kind. He was very kind. But yeah, for that one, I like and it was also summer and so hot up here. I'm on the third floor in Toronto. And so to record, I have to turn all my fans off. And it was like plus 40. And like, it was, yeah, I
Yeah.
was like, I definitely, that gig, I was like, I am never going to get called by Nat Geo, and that might be okay. I may be also done.
Okay,
But we
so
got it done.
Nat
Yeah.
Geo, National Geographic, we're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Just in case anybody listening doesn't know what Nat Geo is.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Toronto. This was a part of your sort of story I wanted to make sure I understood, because raised around Edmonton, Northern Alberta, which has a pretty good, or at least geographically more connected to your Indigenous roots and heritage and culture. You bump around in those discovery years after high school, land at UBC in Vancouver, which gives you a lot of opportunity. You get connections to Vancouver Folk Festival, and then Tanya, and you start down this trajectory of recording albums, making your own creative music. Then you end up in Toronto, which, in the Canadian music like landscape, right? You could, if you keep backing out far enough, you'll start to look at it and see it's Toronto, and then it's the rest of the country. And it's Toronto telling everybody you need to move to Toronto, and everyone else trying to decide at what part of their career whether they need to do that or not. That's what Canadian music looks like. Like in the States, you have Nashville or you have LA, right?
LA,
Or primarily the world, but Canadian population and everything being down on the Trans-Canada, what it is, that's sort of what it often looks like at the 500-foot view. So was that a part of your choice to Toronto? Was it an industry choice? And when did that happen?
It was not an industry choice. It was a bad love choice. I moved here for a girl, and then she broke up with me, I think like 2 months after I moved.
Oh no.
But there's also there was a bit of an industry to it. So Toronto has a beautiful Indigenous art scene. And I found like most of my friends in Vancouver, most of them are like harm reduction workers and doing the good work, doing the hard and dirty work of keeping people safe. But not a lot of my friends were musicians or artists. And here in Toronto, the majority of my friends are artists and are musicians, or not musicians, but like are in Indigenous arts. And I think that support is really important. Yeah. So I originally moved here for love, and then it worked out.
Has Toronto contributed since then? Do you feel
yeah,
like be able to, like, two things, I guess. One is just, is that we're closer vicinity to a lot of these opportunities for either these unicorn requests, and those sort of things being centric to Toronto, as well as access to other musicians and things like that you cross with. Has that been a part of shaping probably
definitely.
since then?
Yeah, like Toronto has given me like so many opportunities, so many great opportunities that are like pretty wild. Like, like being the band leader for the Cavalcade of Lights, or for New Year's, being the band leader for like the New Year's thing at Nathan Phillips Square for like, 80,000 whatever people. Those are huge opportunities. And like being the musicians here are fantastic. So like when I dropped Orchestral Powwow, we did it at the WestJet stage at the Harbourfront Center. It's outside free stage, beautiful. And I think I had like 30 players on stage with me. Like it was just like, it has given me so much, and it's given me so much responsibility that I've had to like stand up to, So it was definitely the right move. And like, yeah, it's true. Like being close to Ottawa and Montreal and New York is like actually really good. Yeah. And BC, I felt like near the end of my time there that I hit that glass ceiling, and it was just like, there's only enough room for like 3 weird cellists in Vancouver, like there just like wasn't enough.
There's more than one?
Yeah. So it didn't really feel like I felt stagnant there. So I did move for love, but I also moved because I needed to get out of Vancouver.
What year was that?
It was like 10 years ago now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so did you meet your now wife in Toronto?
Yeah, totally.
Was that through music scene connections? Because you brought her out on that Love is a Battlefield. She got to
Hmm.
sing, which was
Yeah.
beautiful, by the way.
Mhm.
And I can't
Yeah.
imagine how great and wonderful that is for you to probably blend those things. But yeah,
Mhm.
so did you meet through music, or was it just
Yeah.
a was it
She
an
came.
app? Was it, I don't know. I'm
No,
just
no, no. I've never rapped. It was I'm a rock star. What do you mean? Yeah, it was at a show that I played. Is when I first met her, and I introduced myself.
she attended your show. Okay, this is a perfect rock star story. So
Yeah,
this
and
is
I introduced myself, and I was like, "Hey, I'm Cris," and she's like, "I know," and she turned around and walked away. And I was
oh,
like, "Who's that?" And then
that's
I
badass.
chased her. Yeah, and then I chased her for like months. Yeah.
And so how long have you been together now?
It'll be like 8 years. We're going on married 9 years. Yeah, we're the 21st is our 7 year wedding anniversary.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
it's the copper
so
year.
it's the copper year. There you go.
Mhm.
So in this like trajectory of your career, and I just first off, I want to say I really appreciate too a lot of the little insights or what I hope to pull out of our conversation, which is you didn't take a normal path, right? Like
Mhm.
you had normal aspirations that I think a lot of people had, but you had, I think, what a lot of people on the outside would consider like a whole bunch of roadblocks and setbacks to that normal path or those
Mhm.
set of aspirations, which you've clearly overcome with a lot of enthusiasm, which is amazing. And so when I look back and over that timeline, like getting to where you are right now, what do you feel has been the thing that's really been able to give you a career this
I
long?
think like because I am so there's only one Derksen, like there's only one of me. Like I think my perception of the world around me is and I think the way that I creatively do that with the cello and all of the different things that I add to it, I think I am unique and I think people like that and want more of that. I'm guessing kind of. But like yeah, I think it's like my perception of the world is what they want.
Yeah. Do you think, do you feel like as an artist, do you feel, how do I want to phrase this? I don't like the current word, but I'll say it because everyone uses it and knows what I mean. Do you feel seen for all the parts of yourself that you want to be seen for? Like a lot of artists feel like, I mean, there's different versions of this where they don't, right? It's either like I made that one song 15 years ago and that's all people want to hear, or that's all they think I do, or maybe they got involved in some other thing or some advocacy and they only become known for one thing, or they were in a band and they can't seem to break out of a thing. I'm curious what, because of all these different things you've touched on, like your Juno-nominated, like your compositions, your soundtracking, your personal, your own versions of like creative original music, you're bringing your culture to the front and collaborating with so many people, like all these different things. Do you feel like that has scratched whatever that itch is just inside of like Cris? Or do you feel like it's just the way it turned out?
I mean, half the time I'm like, I just have a weird job, but I am so grateful to have this weird job. Do I feel seen? Yeah, I'm way too busy all the time. Like for sure. I feel privileged. And I also like going back to like don't be a dick thing. The other day I posted because Calgary, I'm doing a performance with Calgary Phil, and they put my show as like buy this gift, and it was like a photo of me, and I was like, look, I'm a literal gift, and like got all these great compliments. But like the best compliment in there was like, yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day and saying that I knew you, and they responded, yeah, Cris knows everybody. And I think that's cool. Like I think I'm like,
Mm,
yeah, I work in so many different worlds that I do meet so many people across our country, and I'm like, I'm very based out of here. Like I do tour internationally, but my work is here, and
yeah.
that's important to me.
Mm. Oh,
Yeah.
that's great. I feel like is a version of advocacy ingrained in, you think, everything you do. I think when we're young, there's a version of it that's just really a little unbridled passion, right? Like the way we think that we have something to say, which is very different than when we get a little bit older and we decide that, or we just see that somebody's maybe gonna, because of our experience and time, give us opportunities to sit at desks and around tables where we get to have a voice. I'm wondering what that part plays for you, because you have so many things you could be an advocate for.
Yeah, I definitely like, because I'm doing so much in the classical world right now, and definitely I run the Indigenous classical gathering, and that is a beautiful thing. That, like, what I was finding is I knew so many Indigenous musicians across Canada, and I knew that there was like Indigenous composers, but I just didn't know them. I didn't have that relationship with them, and so I realized, like, classical music gets so siloed, and you're just with your orchestra, or you're just with your people. More often than not, you're the only Indigenous person. So I was like, we need to build that community, and we need to build that relationship, because once we build those networks, we can open the doors for so many more people. It's about, always, building up people around you so everyone is successful.
You made a reference at the very start of our conversation about, and again, this goes back to this, obviously good self-awareness and awareness of your spaces that you're in and people, which I think is a fantastic personal trait. Of, you said, people don't all sign up to hear the real intense stories that you could tell. Right. And I get that awareness, like, personally, since we know each other, right? When I stopped working in a church and went away from that with my own personal unraveling of everything I needed to unravel there, I learned very quickly how to start to pick and choose my words, because I was acting in the sense of protecting others for a long time, of like, I don't need to blow their world up because I'm changing. And that was specifically related to religion and religious upbringing and all the things that go with that. And but I learned that sense, and I'm wondering, in your own evolution of having such a strong sense of, what room I'm in, what people am I, entertaining with these stories right now, are, the act of picking and choosing. Does that feel burdensome, or does it all just still very natural to you at this stage of life to tell the stories at the time and just sort of improvise?
Yeah, it feels like it's just part of my job, just part of like what I do. Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's a pretty, like, Cris, that's a really positive, like, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm going to walk away from this conversation and feel very impacted by the level of positivity that you have for the whole thing and where you are and what you've been able to do. Because I can't help but assume that there's an underside to the coin of a lot of closed doors and a lot of opposition, and a lot of challenges that you've probably had to also work through and face. And the music industry is two things. You've said one of them already. It's relationship. It's not business most of the time. It's also pretty cleanly split between jaded people and optimistic. I don't know if you agree with that, but you are clearly on the optimistic side.
I think
has that been a choice? Is that just a choice you made?
I think it's also like, like, I just try and keep my nose clean, like, just try and keep to my path, and like not put blinders a little bit on to like the noise going on around me, because it's like everyone has their own version of success, and success also changes, and it's a movable thing, and like I can't be worried about the competition around me. I have to just try and do my best job.
Yeah.
Like, keep it to me. It's about.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, that's refreshing also to hear, and definitely goes along with the incredible positivity that you put out just when you talk about your experiences and your opportunities that have gone along the way. And, I think underlying, like, this is what, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like, it's a heartbreaking industry, and like for sure you got to
Mm.
have like thick skin to a degree, but I feel like if I got jaded, that would affect the music, you know?
That's a great point. Like that's a man, that's a fantastic point about, I mean, you listen to people who will sit and go over an artist's discography and you can start to pick apart their personal life based on the albums along the timeline, right?
Yeah,
When we know what was going on in retrospect quite
yeah.
often, and you can see how that can affect it. So I think that's also really refreshing to hear. What are the things right now? Like you said, you're mostly, working in classical music. So what are the things that you're working on? I know you mentioned one of them that you're going to be working on through 2025
Mhm.
into 2026. Are there other sort of opportunities on the horizon that feel like a highlight to
Yeah,
you?
like I mean this whole year has been a highlight. Like playing
Mm.
Carnegie Hall was a highlight. I did my first ballet, Nat Geo was a highlight. Um I'm the composer. This is so weird. Uh I am the composer for the Canadian Pavilion for the World Expo. So the World Expo happens every 2 years. I was in fact the
Yeah.
Canadian composer for the last one as well in Dubai. So, but in this one's more of an installation piece. So when you walk through the building, you'll hear cello. You'll hear and like also a lot of other
Mm.
noises, but like you'll hear. It'll be me that you'll hear as you walk through the building. So that's pretty cool. Um, and then the TSO thing is working with CAMH, which is mental health and addictions hospital here in Toronto.
Wow.
So working with clients that want to join for 2 months, eight sessions like every Monday, and creating a piece together. And we have no idea what that looks like yet because we don't know who's going to be there. But
Oh, wow.
I am so stoked for that one. Yeah, and then also my summer's kind of shaping up. I have this album that I've been sitting on for like way too long. So
Oh, that's great.
that's gotta come out. Um, yeah, I've every day. It's basically done. I just need to do now. I need the mastering and the artwork and stuff. But
Are you in that space where it's like taking up a whole bunch of room in your head and you're like, we need to get this thing finished and done?
no, I think that's the problem. I think I've forgotten about it. then
Oh,
and then
okay.
every time I'm like, oh yeah, and then I got to get that thing done. But there's like I'm currently in like the end of year kind of vibe where I'm trying to write like 5 pieces really fast because somehow things got shifted and moved, and
Mm.
now we got 3 weeks left, and I'm like, okay, go.
Has anyone used the word prolific with you before?
Yeah,
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 that's quite an amazing amount of volume that you're pushing out.
yeah,
Well, I want to say, Cris, first of all, I super appreciate you taking the time to just talk about your story,
yeah,
like
man.
walk through your history timeline. I'm interested in that with every artist. I'm particularly interested with you because we have some history
Mm-hmm.
together. Um, and I guess when I said earlier, I think one of the most remarkable things about your story, I want everybody to hear is this positivity, this choice that you've made, the fact that you call it your job to intertwine and blend not only your artistic influences, your heritage influences, all these pieces together, and you call it your job is amazing. And in the middle of it all, not only are you not a dick, you're gracious to people like me who got it wrong for so long, who didn't see you for who you were. And I mean, personally, uh, that's why I love you so much, because you showed me grace when I was not the person I should be. So I am so excited, and proud isn't the right word because I don't have any stakes in your career, but I feel proud because I feel some version of stakes for you
Yeah.
because you matter to me. You're part of my life and history. So I just wanted to communicate to you that like you being here so kind and gracious to me is a metaphor of the better version that you taught me in my life, and I think an impact I think you're probably having around the world. And I don't know whether that resonates, whether you feel that in
Yeah.
your efforts in your career.
I think like the takeaway for me, like when I left the church, and like you all aren't acting with love, I guess, and I'm like, that's the opposite. Like and our church was very snotty too, like very, very snotty. And I'm like, you don't have like, you are not acting like Jesus would, you know?
Yeah.
There's no love here.
Yeah.
And yeah.
My catchphrase when I left was, they're more concerned with being right than they are with being good.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
if that can't change, it's not what it says it is.
Exactly.
And I've found, and I just said that,
Mm-hmm.
and 24 years later, I still hang my hat on that
Yeah,
thing I said at that
totally.
time, which is exactly what you're saying. Your resiliency, though, despite things that a lot of other people might treat as roadblocks or things that are preventing them, is incredible. And I'm so happy that you'd be willing to sort of tell the whole story
Mm-hmm.
with me here. So I just want to say thank you so much for being a guest and
Yeah,
telling your story and talking about it. And I look forward to seeing and hearing what comes next for
totally.
you. And if you bring another touring show through Edmonton, I sure hope that you'll let us know in advance like you did
Yeah.
before.
This one, come to Calgary. I'm gonna do the Carnegie
Okay.
piece in Calgary. The Carnegie piece in
Okay.
Calgary in March. I'll send you the deets.
Okay, I meant to ask you, like, is playing Carnegie Hall like up at the top of the things for you? Like, was that like?
I mean, it wasn't even on my list, man. It was too high for me to be on my list. Yeah, it was really, really cool. Like the conductor, yeah, like he taught Bradley Cooper how to conduct. He's like famous. Like
Wow.
he's like one of the top 5 in the world. So for him to even know who I was to commission me, that blew my mind. And then the Carnegie bit on top of that was just like
Yeah.
super mind blowing. I did have a freak out like 2 weeks before. I had a full melty and being like, I didn't ask for this. I don't deserve this. Like
Oh no.
this is too much. And but then it was just glorious.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. That's
And my mom
incredible.
and my mom got to come. It was very cute.
Oh, really? Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, what a great wrap up. We started talking about your mom. So,
totally. Yeah.
okay. Well, I really appreciate you, Cris, and thanks for
Cool.
giving me your time and opening yourself up. And I look forward to what's coming out, and I wish you all the best.
Awesome. Say hi to Arlene for me.
Bye bye.
Hey, I'm Alexi. Stick around for post fame with me and my dad.
I don't know why. Every time it's like the worst connection of all of our guests is you and me being in the same house or something.
Yeah.
So that's okay. We'll figure it out. Episode 5, Cris Derksen.
Yeah.
So this is a really old friend who,
Yeah. A name I've heard lots in passing.
yeah, let's talk about Cris in that episode. For me, it was interesting to have Cris. Obviously, a really old connection, which I mean, most of the old connections I would have on the podcast would be ones, that were sort of either connected while doing music or in growing music or in some version of that if I'm bringing on an old friend. But this wasn't like that. Like this was a connection that I never ever knew would end up in the place now, the 2 careers and the 2 paths, and being able to have a chance to talk to her about all the things that she's done in her life and career. And I know, like you said, you've heard the name before, but what sort of things stood out? Like
there was a lot, like there were so many things that weren't like resounding, but were just like, it was just new information. Like especially like when she went into like the like whole symphony, everything. Like I don't know, it's just like a section of like the music scene that I've just never even given thought to. Because like I don't know, kind of why would I?
Well, me
And
too.
just like everything said, like there wasn't one even like pinpoint. It was like everything that was said was like, oh, like just like new, like it was just new and cool information, especially from someone like that's in her shoes. And then like additionally, when she was saying how like, and it's a point I'll get to in a second is like the main thing. But when she said no to the Cirque du Soleil when she was still quite young, I just thought that was like, I'm just like, what an interesting like, oh yeah, I said no to the Cirque du Soleil because I wanted to like work on my own things and like do the symphony and and I was just like, what a life like to live. Like that's just so unique to her, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it really is like who. I guess first reaction is everybody would be like, who would do that, particularly for somebody who's still up and coming. But
Yeah.
I guess it sort of speaks to what I felt was the underlying story for her, which is she's always just followed exactly what she thinks she wants to do and needs to do. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no version of being persuaded either by something glamorous or whatever it is, the
Yeah.
things that she wanted. Yeah, I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah. But that was kind of my main, leading into my main pickup is like usually when I listen to the episodes, there's a couple things um that are kind of like unrelated, but
Mhm.
all the points I put down were the same, and it was that she was like talking about like I mean like to quote her, she had like no 5-year plan. Like she didn't believe in creating a 5-year plan for herself. And like kind of as you just said, it was more about like putting herself out there. And that's like exactly as she phrased it was like, yeah, I just like put myself out there like into the world and also like those kind of affirmations like into my own mind. And like that's how she kind of planned on getting her name out there. And I just think it's so interesting because like you're doing the podcast to see all these different perspectives of people who are in and around like the music industry and scene and et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like a lot of stories, although so unique, have like kind of foundational factors that are similar. And one is kind of like that you plan and like, everyone that you've talked to like has had like a plan and followed this plan and worked really hard. And she's done the working really hard, but the like foundational, just like solid planning of like, this is the point I want to get to, and this is how I get there, like that's not for her. And
Yeah.
it isn't for everybody, but you just don't hear that often from people like that. It's like when
Yeah.
you're trying to be successful in something that you don't just like create a like plan and a goal and like try to reach it, that she just wants to kind of take it as it comes. I just thought that was super interesting.
So I like that observation because that's exactly how I felt. And to be completely honest, that's quite really, I guess that's the underlying That's
For
the
sure.
underlying part of the story that I hoped would come out when I knew I wanted to interview her on the podcast
Yeah.
because, well, not that I knew all of that, but just it was a different path. Like it would be easy for me to get people and their story, as you sort of said, might sound familiar or predictable
Mhm.
about how they make those plans and follow them through. And hers is a different thing. So she's symphony cello
Yeah.
stuff. She's really as much a rock star in every way as anybody I can think of that I would get on this show. So, I mean, that's a pretty badass choice to turn down Cirque du Soleil. So,
Yeah, especially when you want to like, so many people would see that as like, oh, this is my chance to like break through. Like that's the term I always use is like when you're up and coming in her position, it's like that's the breakthrough. Like that's like
yeah,
how to get yourself out there. And she was just like, this is a breakthrough, but not mine.
yeah,
Pass. I think it's
that's
great. I
the
think it's
thing.
so cool.
Yeah, it's punk rock for sure. Yeah, so that is, I'm glad you brought that up because I felt it's the same for me while I was talking to her and even doing the edits right now. Um, that I'm just sort of struck by primarily her optimism all the way through, both
Hmm.
that things were going to work out for her and that the way they worked out weren't some version of, like you said, breakthrough that fit some model, but she's so optimistic and she's so pleasantly well
Yeah.
pleased with a lot of the things she's got to do and the opportunities she have, and she just treats it like her job, and
Yeah.
it's her job. And so um, the one of the things about the podcast, the only thing I was going to say was what was a little unfortunate is I had two audio glitches in
Mhm.
pieces that having to edit them out, like take little sections out, like small, but
Yeah.
one of them you would never know, like the conversation ends up being seamless without the way I
Oh,
had to
perfect.
move it. But at the very beginning, she did start talking about her mom, and I lost part of that. And she was sort of talking about, I mean, it was a little bit more, it felt like it was a little more conversation for her and I. So it's probably not the worst part to have lost, but it also had a couple glitches, and I wasn't sure how that is going to
Mhm.
seam together because then we reference
that conversation later about her mom, and I always hate it if a podcast and then I'm like, I don't remember them talking about that. So we'll see, right?
Yeah.
But it's the only other thing that sort of was standing out to me, and I was like, but that's okay. But I'm really happy that she was on. I was really happy we could talk about somebody really from a different life and a different path than the one that I've been used to. And being able to hear her talk about it with so much optimism, like I said, and just a lot of gratitude and pride in what she's been able to do in her life was very refreshing and encouraging. So pretty special for me.
Very
She's so
special,
great.
yeah.
Yeah. So I also quickly wanted to just talk to you about some music things, as we always like to do. But in particular, I was just going to ask you about, you get to go to a show in Vancouver, I guess next week. It's right at the end of the month, right? So I guess that's
like
the end
in a week.
very soon, end of February. So you're going to be going to see Tyler, the Creator, in Vancouver, which I think is kind of cool, because the story is, and I was talking to you about this earlier, and I don't know why. When I bought you those tickets on Ticketmaster, I hadn't even thought about the connection to when I took you and your brother to Day in Vegas, which was like 2019. 2019. Yeah, it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah, it was like grade 9-ish.
Yeah, it was 2019 in like April of that. And in Vegas, there was 2 days, and we went to one day, and we weren't going the day that Tyler, the Creator, was supposed to be there. But all you wanted to do was stand in the ridiculous line to buy his merch. Anyhow, so we stood for over an hour in the merch line.
3 shows too, like got there early.
Yeah.
Like didn't know who like other artists or merch would be there, or if there was going to be guest artists or not. I was like, seen him or not, like I need to get in that line and buy some shirts.
But you got the shirt. Did you get one or did you get 2 things?
I got 2. I have 2 now.
But you didn't get the posters there. You ordered those online, right? The ones that you have?
Oh, the one I used to have up. Yeah. No, I ordered that online.
Yeah, okay. But you got the shirts.
Got the
one
shirts.
of them was a great story of a mustard stain and a shirtless boy. So we won't tell that story here, but it's a great story. Yeah, so that all came back to me when we were talking about you going to Tyler, the Creator next week. And I thought it'd be a funny, quick story to tell, because that day in Vegas is maybe the first time I was going to a show where I had no business being at. It was
so
like
old, you said.
It was 2 days of hip hop, and it wasn't even as much old. I mean, there was a bit of that, but because I just don't usually feel irrelevant in any music scene that I'm around until I'm at the point where I knew 2 names. I knew Doja Cat
and Post Malone.
And Post Malone, and who I'm a huge fan of. So that was incredible. And the Doja Cat show was absolutely, I said then it looked like a Grammy performance, and that was 19. And I did discover some people there that was really cool. But the most fun for me was actually going to a show where it wasn't for me anymore. And you and your brother having an incredible time on this massive fairgrounds, and you were basically sprinting from one end to the other because they were beating the main artists from one stage to the other. And so finally your cousin and I just plopped in the middle.
And you guys were done.
Got drinks and watched you go back and forth running to each performance, which is pretty cool. But the other fun tie-in for you and I to that is when we started playing Spottle a little while ago, right? When we started playing Spottle last fall, and your brother and you couldn't realize why I could get a bunch of the answers that I shouldn't. I think that's where it all started. I think from that moment on, I started being more familiar and paying attention to what was going on in hip hop and stuff.
That's so funny.
Not actively, but a little bit. Anyway, all these little tie-ins for me. But what are you looking for? You said you maybe aren't going to get in the merch line. What are you most excited for the show?
I think if it was in Edmonton, I'd definitely be tempted for a merch line. I mean, when am I not? But I think because my friend and I get one backpack each for 2 days and plan on hitting up the Granville Market and whatnot. Yeah, I don't know if I want to spend like $120+ on a hoodie for it to take up half of my backpack and be a struggle. I mean, I might be.
Yeah, it's already an extra investment to be going overnight on a plane to Vancouver to see the show. So I totally can respect that. And I didn't know you were going to hit up Granville Market, but that's mostly, you'll probably just eat a bunch of fresh food and enjoy it.
Oh, yeah, this is true.
Hopefully the weather.
I'm so good at finding things to buy. We know this.
We do know this. Well, my light just went out. The battery finally died. This is funny.
I was wondering when that would happen to one of us.
That's fine. It doesn't really matter. I haven't used any video for clips yet anyhow. All these things I'm going to have to decide what to keep or not. Anyhow, that's all. That's all I had to chat about today. Is that all we have to chat about?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes we just spend so much time with each other that we chat about other things. Yeah. Well, no, we chat in the car and we chat in the house and then we come to here and we're like, we've already exhausted our list. Yeah.
So, okay, I'll have to start saving things. I'm going to start saving something in my head, and that'll be hard, but it'll be fine.
Write it down.
Doesn't matter. Okay, well, I really enjoyed Cris, and as always, I really enjoy talking to you. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, love
Bye-bye.
you.
Love you.